From ABC, this is World News Tonight with Peter Jennings, reporting tonight from Los Angeles.
Good evening. In Washington today, with a good deal of fanfare, the government gave two major drug companies permission to market the drug interferon for use in the treatment of cancer, a certain kind of cancer. Doctors and medical researchers are usually very careful about using the word breakthrough, but that was the word being used today, and very specifically by two federal government officials. Some people are skeptical, but as we said, there was a good deal of publicity. And here's ABC's George Strait.
It was an unprecedented show. Long limousines for the drug company executives, and on stage, the head of the Food and Drug Administration and the Secretary of Health and Human Services, all to announce the approval for use by the general public of a drug to treat a rare form of cancer, hairy cell leukemia.
Today marks a new age in medicine.
This is a milestone, a breakthrough, and a sign of what is likely to come.
The drug is interferon, the same interferon that was touted as a miracle drug 7 years ago. It wasn't then, and experts say it isn't now.
It's been called a breakthrough many times. I would certainly not call today's development a breakthrough.
While interferon will prolong the lives of the 300 Americans who contract hairy cell leukemia annually, 7 years of experiments with this drug show that it's too toxic and too expensive to be worth the marginal benefits it gives to patients with other kinds of cancer. But now that interferon has government approval, doctors can prescribe it for anything.
I think it would be a mistake to take this approval of interferon as a signal to doctors in the community that interferon is now ready for treatment of patients in private practice and for treatment of a wide variety of tumors.
Interferon is the first genetically engineered drug to get government approval. Dr. Young hopes that approval will spur work on similar drugs like interleukin-2, used to treat cancer. So interferon remains as controversial as ever, but what worries experts is that the tone of the government's approval announcement could mislead millions of vulnerable cancer patients. George Strait, ABC News, Washington.
Joining me this evening from Boston, our medical editor, Dr. Tim Johnson. Tim, I'm puzzled about one thing. Why do two government agencies show up to give this drug such celebrity treatment?
Well, at best, Peter, it was to mark an historic occasion, namely the first official approval of a new kind of cancer drug using the body's own biological substance to treat cancer. At worst, it represents another example of media hype that will mislead the general public and, more importantly, cancer patients into thinking that there now is a new and effective treatment for most kinds of cancer.
Okay, Tim, you're a doctor. Do you think there's justification in calling this a breakthrough?
No, I do not think that word should have been used today, quite frankly. It is a breakthrough for those few hundred patients and few thousand total patients that have this rare form of cancer, but it would not be represented rightly as a breakthrough for those who are suffering from the major forms of cancer in this country, such as lung and breast and colon. I wish that word had not been used.
Tim Johnson in Boston, thank you very much indeed. This has been a very difficult day for the families of the astronauts killed in the Challenger disaster. They were briefed on the findings of the Presidential Commission investigating the accident and on the details of what happened at the time of the explosion. And at the same time, one of the senior NASA administrators involved in that launch has stepped down. Here's ABC's James Walker.
William Lucas, the director of the Marshall Space Flight Center in Alabama, went on closed-circuit television today to announce he was stepping down.
Now that the causes of the accident are well enough understood so that the problems can be fixed, and because corrective action has already begun, and inasmuch as the space shuttle cannot fly again before the end of 1986, I have concluded that it is appropriate for me to retire now.
Lucas had been boss of Marshall since 1974. Under his leadership, the rocket and booster engine systems that powered the shuttle was developed and flown. With his decision to retire, Lucas effectively becomes still another major casualty within NASA resulting from the Challenger disaster. Lucas's decision to retire was applauded by Congressman James Scheuer, a member of the House committee that oversees the space agency.
If you have responsibility, you must have accountability. When there's gross human error resulting in tragedy and death and destruction, heads have got to roll. You've got to have new decision makers.
Lucas is only the latest personnel change to hit NASA, which has a whole new layer of senior officials. In addition, at Marshall, George Hardy, Lawrence Malloy, and Stan Reinhardt, who were all top managers, and who were involved in the decision to launch Challenger despite objections are either leaving NASA or have been reassigned. Morton Thiokol, builder of the booster rockets blamed for the shuttle disaster, has announced that 4 vice presidents who overruled recommendations against launch have been reassigned or retired. In Washington today, Presidential Commission Chairman William Rogers briefed the families of the Challenger crew members about the panel's soon-to-be-released report. The families said they would not comment. ABC News has learned the 200-page report will say that a key reason for the disaster was that NASA pressured itself into launching Challenger. It will also say the orbiter did not explode but broke up while tumbling at supersonic speed, Mach 1.7 to be exact. It will not say how or when the crew members died. To make sure NASA implements responsible design and management changes and does not go for the quick fix, the panel will recommend that the agency report to the President 1 year from now as to how NASA has met the Commission's recommendations. James Walker, ABC News, Washington.
The Soviet Union is reporting today that there are new areas affected by radioactivity beyond the original 18-mile danger zone around the reactor at Chernobyl. The Soviet newspaper Pravda reports that the new dirty spots, as they're calling them, are in the nearby Republic of Belarusia, perhaps as far as 80 miles away. Pravda says that some 60,000 school children have been evacuated from the area. Here at home, they are still suffering from the weather. In Texas, there has been a new wave of thunderstorms over San Antonio, and just today there was a foot of rain in some places. This was a common scene, the flash flood stranding scores of motorists. About 2,000 people were evacuated from their homes and their businesses. Many schools were closed. The fire chief in San Antonio said he hadn't seen water this high in 60 years. Later in this broadcast, an American accused of spying for the government of Israel makes a deal with the prosecution. Corazon Aquino, the Filipino president, a disappointing report card on her first 100 days. And the mayor, Clint Eastwood, a tough guy at City Hall.
This is World News Tonight with Peter Jennings in Los Angeles. Brought to you by Remington Microscreen Shavers.
A husband and a wife accused of spying for Israel in this country have pleaded guilty to the charge in a deal worked out with the federal government. But as our senior correspondent John Scally reports, this may not defuse a very touchy situation between Israel and Washington.
It was revealed in court today that Jonathan J. Pollard met secretly dozens of times with Israeli representatives to whom he delivered suitcases full of secret U.S. documents. His Israeli handlers were so delighted with his output that they gave Pollard the name Danny Cohen, an Israeli passport, and a foreign bank account. As his wife sobbed in the courtroom, federal prosecutors told how Pollard had used his position as a civilian analyst in the U.S. Navy to steal hundreds of documents that the Israelis wanted. Pollard's attorney, Richard Hybe, argued afterward that Pollard's actions were not intended to harm the U.S.
This is a person who is, notwithstanding his plea to this particular offense, totally committed to America.
The government's indictment also named 4 Israeli co-conspirators, including an Israeli Air Force colonel, Aviam Sela, and 3 others. In Jerusalem, an Israeli spokesman reaffirmed that the Israeli government had never authorized the Pollard espionage operation. But U.S. Attorney Joseph DeGeneva indicated Israel's responsibility is yet to be determined.
ABC News has been told that 2 other Americans and several more Israelis are being investigated. New evidence turned up recently has convinced some investigators that there is a much wider Israeli network in the U.S., which dates back to the 1950s and which is still in place. The Israelis deny this. John Scally, ABC News, Washington.
In Baltimore today, the jury has begun its deliberations in the trial of the accused man spying for the Soviet Union, Ronald Pelton. In closing arguments, the government attorney called for the maximum penalty of life imprisonment and said Pelton would still be selling secrets to the Soviets if he hadn't been caught. The defense repeated its contention that Pelton's civil rights had been violated and that his confession had been obtained illegally. Well, it was 5 years ago that martial law was declared in Poland in response to the growing strength of the Solidarity movement. Tonight there is growing intrigue in Washington and in Warsaw about just how sudden that crackdown really was and how early the United States knew it was coming. Here's John McWethy at the State Department.
For months in 1981, the Solidarity trade union in Poland had been growing in strength.
a direct challenge to the leadership of General Wojtek Jaruzelski and his benefactors in the Soviet Union. Finally, on December 13th of 1981, Jaruzelski announced a crackdown, imposition of martial law, and the beginning of the end of the Solidarity movement in Poland. The Washington Post reported today that the CIA had a high-ranking mole in Jaruzelski's government at the time, a senior staff officer named Władysław Kuklinski, who helped plan the crackdown and who simultaneously fed the CIA exquisite detail about what was going on inside the Polish government. The Post reported that Kuklinski was pulled out of Poland just before the crackdown because he believed he was about to be compromised. He and his family were provided with new identities and still live in the U.S. Now the Polish government, through spokesman Jerzy Urban, claims that had the U.S. gone public with the actual date of the crackdown using information from its spy, the Reagan administration could have somehow prevented Poland from imposing martial law. State Department officials say that is ridiculous, that Poland, after brutally smashing Solidarity 5 years ago, is simply trying to fabricate a way to lay blame anywhere other than where it belongs, and that is with the Polish government itself. John McWethy, ABC News, the State Department.
We have a note this evening about the former UN Secretary General Kurt Waldheim. The Israeli Minister of Justice said today there is no evidence to link Mr. Waldheim personally with Nazi atrocities during World War II. An Israeli Commission of Inquiry had been trying to find proof that he was directly involved, but it has not. When we come back, the Senate, it starts talking taxes as we continue our broadcast from Los Angeles. As we told you last night, there were a number of primaries around the country yesterday. In some cases, they point the way towards the battle for the U.S. Senate this fall. In Alabama, the Democrats picked Congressman Richard Shelby to run against the incumbent Senator Jeremiah Denton. In South Dakota, the incumbent Republican, Senator James Abner, staved off a challenge from the governor. Abner will run against Congressman Tom Daschle in November. Here in California, Republicans had 12 choices for their senatorial nominee. They gave the nod to Congressman Ed Schau, who's regarded here as the strongest candidate to run against the incumbent Democrat, Senator Alan Cranston. California has also approved Proposition 51, which was designed to limit liability insurance awards. And all 33 candidates affiliated with the extremist Lyndon LaRouche across the country were defeated in yesterday's races for the House and the Senate. There was a sigh of relief in the Democratic Party. It was back to basic training for the commander-in-chief today. President Reagan paid a visit to the Parris Island Marine Recruit Depot in South Carolina. The president watched the men go through, and in some cases not make it all the way through, some elements of basic training. The president used the occasion to push once again for an increase in the defense budget. Well, the U.S. Senate now has television, and today it also has tax reform. Now that senators are back from their Memorial Day break, armed with lots of advice from the folks back home, the debate on tax reform has begun in the Senate as a whole. On Capitol Hill, here's ABC's Britt Hume.
The Senate now has an office for the coalition of more than 400 business, labor, and other interest groups working to pass this bill as is. 3 tax brackets, 15% and 27% for individuals, 33% for corporations.
Once you start pulling on that ball of yarn, you run the risk of having the whole thing unravel.
But there is already a lot of pulling, most of all to save the deduction for individual retirement account contributions. Cards and letters have been pouring in.
If this bill is so weakly constructed that its passage hinges on taking away a good program in which millions of Americans have invested in it, so be it.
But the bill's chief architect argued that a tax code riddled with breaks is unfair and unnecessary.
Somehow, this country was founded, settled, explored, mined, timbered, farmed, and finally moved west without any tax incentives.
And Democrat Bradley recalled his pro-basketball days and a lawyer's advice on avoiding taxes.
I just wanted to play basketball and be paid well, I said. It's not that simple, he said. But it ought to be, and it can be.
And the betting here tonight is that it will be, that the more people hear about this bill, the better they will like it, and that even the IRA deduction, which seemed certain only a few weeks ago to be restored, is now in doubt. Peter?
Thanks, Britt. We will check with you on a very regular basis. On Wall Street today, the stocks were down about 7 points in light trading. And when we come back, a challenging first 100 days for the Filipino President Corazon Aquino, when our broadcast continues from Los Angeles. Overseas, once again, in South Africa today, the government has given and taken away. The government published details of a long-awaited bill to restore South African citizenship to more than 10 million blacks disenfranchised when their tribal homelands were forced to become independent. The critics say it is far short of what had been promised. This was also the day in which the government has banned all public gatherings linked to the anniversary of the 1976 Soweto riots. The ban includes indoor as well as outdoor gatherings. Speaking via satellite to a gathering of ABC affiliates here in Los Angeles today, the South African Bishop Desmond Tutu said the ban would be defied.
We are going to have meetings of some sort or other, whatever the government decides, and it will be more difficult for them to control those meetings than if they had allowed our people to commemorate what is obviously a very traumatic occurrence for them.
We take note this evening of a political anniversary. It is 100 days now since the new Filipino president, Corazon Aquino, was sworn into office. They have been tough days. ABC's Jim Laurie is in Manila.
The 4 days of February. Filipinos have come to regard the events which toppled Marcos and installed Aquino as nothing short of a miracle.
Thank you, Jesus.
Unfortunately, there is little miraculous about the 100 days since. For the most part, Corazon Aquino's first 100 have been days of trial and error, she counseling patience as her government confronted problems which have no quick solution. From the start, some of her actions provoked dissent. She threw out the old Constitution, then all local government officials, no matter how popular, and replaced them with appointed ones.
Unfortunately, the methods that have been used are causing her to lose ground, lose some credibility.
And every loss was a rallying point for Marcos loyalists who stage weekly protests. The convening this week of a constitutional commission should restore credibility by paving the way for local and parliamentary elections. But Aquino faces a far more difficult problem.
On the whole, the insurgency situation has not improved.
Guerrillas of the Communist New People's Army have increased attacks. This despite Aquino's efforts to reach a ceasefire with some 16,000 rebels. Aquino is also struggling to save her ravaged economy. Her government is broke.
The coffers of our nation are nearly empty. We have inherited a national treasury left with a fraction of the national budget for the year.
Meanwhile, the plight of the nation's poor worsens. Some live only by picking through garbage. 70% of the population lives on less than $300 a year. Still, 100 days on, Corazon Aquino draws enthusiastic support wherever she goes.
My government is a Filipino government, and I intend to keep it that way.
She's, I think, shows an increasing talent for government. As she acquires more and more experience, I think there's every prospect that she'll be able to provide very vigorous leadership for this country.
As Corazon Aquino marches beyond 100 days, she may be finding that, compared with the problems ahead, getting rid of Ferdinand Marcos was the easy part. Jim Laurie, ABC News, Manila.
Do you remember the last time you heard the name Terry Anderson? He's the Associated Press correspondent who's been a hostage in the Middle East for more than a year. Mr. Anderson's brother here at home is dying of cancer, and he has sent a videotaped message to Lebanon in the hope that it will be seen on Lebanese television by the people who are still holding Terry.
My father died of cancer waiting to see Terry. He did not see him. Now I have cancer, and I made a vow I would not die until I saw Terry.
There is at least one complication to making this plea. There is no absolute certainty that Terry Anderson is in Lebanon. We'll be back in just a moment.
Is this going to happen to you?
osteoporosis, weak, brittle bones, and stooped posture from the lack of calcium 8 out of 10 women have. Now, Supplical Calcium Supplement can help make a difference. Supplical, the only soft and chewy vanilla calcium square with all the pure calcium doctors say your bones need to help stay strong, straight, and healthy. Choose Supplical. It's never too early or too late to start taking Supplical, soft calcium for strong bones.
Some of you will soon be receiving an important piece of mail. In it, you'll be asked to choose your long-distance phone company. Don't throw it away. And don't give that right to someone else. If you want to be sure to keep the same kind of full service you've always enjoyed with AT&T, check your mail, and then check AT&T. For over 100 years when you reached out, we were there. And you can keep it that way by sending in your ballot.
It's not how many homes we sell. It's how we sell each one. That's why Coldwell Banker is America's largest full-service real estate company. And these days, you don't get bigger unless you do it better. Coldwell Banker, the home sellers, a member of the Sears Financial Network.
Tonight on Nightline, drug testing in the workplace. Necessary, humiliating, a violation of your constitutional rights. Among our guests, Baseball Commissioner Peter Ubero.
And finally this evening from California. It has been a few weeks now since Clint Eastwood took control as the mayor of Carmel, California. He got, you'll recall, an awful lot of attention running for office, but it's been kind of quiet since then. So what's the new mayor been up to? As ABC's Ken Kashiwahara reports, a lot more than posing for pictures.
Along the California coast, Carmel is one of those picturesque towns where residents move to get away from all the big city problems. It's quaint and quiet, and they like it that way.
But wait a minute, there's a new political gun in town, and he's got both barrels loaded.
He's the new mild-mannered mayor, and at only his second city council meeting last night, he started firing, literally, removing planning commissioners who had opposed him and appointing his own.
Anybody have any comments on that?
One council member did. He fired back.
This entire episode is far more typical of the patronage expected in the boroughs of New York City or the wards in Chicago.
This was Clint Eastwood they were talking about, Dirty Harry, who can destroy an opponent with that make my day look. But that didn't stop one resident who accused the mayor of creating
a pervasive impression of vindictiveness.
It began a year ago when planning commissioners rejected Eastwood's plans for an office next to his Hog's Breath restaurant. They also objected to the color of this hotel, too pink, they said, and wanted this bay window moved back 2 inches. Eastwood campaigned to change that attitude and won.
The public has asked for change in an overwhelming way. I would be remiss to not bring about that change.
Indeed, most of the residents at the council meeting appeared to support Eastwood's tough action, but is there a danger here?
You concerned about getting a tough guy image?
No, I don't.
But tough mayor he is, and armed with a popular mandate, Eastwood won his first political shootout. Ken Kashiwahara, ABC News, Carmel, California.
And that is our report on World News Tonight. We have been here in Los Angeles to meet with our affiliates from all across the country, and we thank them fully for their support throughout the year. We'll be back in New York tomorrow. I'm Peter Jennings. Good night from Los Angeles.